any case, here we go.
We should get our
Let's do a quick review of last time. All right, so we talked about the merits of the musical style. We talked about the prima and the seconda practica and the debate between Artusi and Monteverdi. We had the wonderful readings from the two of them to discuss the old traditional versus the new modern style of music. We looked at examples of how composers began to use harsh, unprepared dissonances as a way to express pain and loss, and we're going to see more of that today. We also talked about at the end of class how composers in the Baroque period began to favor homophonic textures, one voice and accompaniment, over polyphonic textures, as a way to most accurately and emotionally express the meaning of a text. And so that is going to become the standard for the next few weeks of our class. At the end, we briefly discussed basso continuo notation, and then very briefly discussed the modes being divided into two systems of cantus mollis and cantus durus. So who can tell me something about those? The mollis and the durus. Yeah?
Cantus mollis is like more subdued and like pleasant emotions, and then cantus durus was like harsher.
What's the difference? Somebody else jump in. Yeah.
Cantus mollis is the flats, and cantus durus is the sharps.
Good job. Thank you. So we're going to see, today we're going to look at a few different operas where there's interplay between these. And so I want you to keep these in mind, and we're going to maybe see how composers use these for various expressive and emotional ends. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into early opera. All right, who would like to be our Vincenzo? Thank you. Pat, please.
Despite the peak of excellence modern music has achieved, we do not hear or see today the least sign of those effects which ancient music produced. Nor again do we read that they were accomplished 50 or 100 years ago, when music was not so common and accessible to all. Consequently, neither its novelty nor its excellence has ever given our modern musicians the power of achieving any of those whose wondrous effects that ancient music achieved, which were so infinitely and desirably and useful, from which we must necessarily conclude that either music or human nature has changed from its original state.
Great, thank you. So this wondrous effects of ancient music, the ability to lead troops to war, to heal, those were desirable and useful. And so he thinks that either humans have changed, which is preposterous because humans remain the same, or music has changed. So therefore the music needs to go back to the style of the ancient Greeks. So the first opera's attempt to take this theory and put it in place in a new style of musical drama. So in the 1590s, Bardi had moved to Rome, Giovanni Bardi the host, but the Florentine Camerata continued their discussions. They moved to the home of Jacopo Corsi. But the two of the most important new members, were poet and librettist Ottavio Rinuccini and composer Jacopo Peri. And these are two of the main figures in the very first operas. So together they staged the first dramatic work sung in its entirety. You could say it's the first opera, though it has some differences from what the works we usually call opera. Daphne, who comes from Greek mythology, many of these early dramas, these early operas are, the librettos are taken from Greek mythology. They'll eventually change, but in their efforts to revive the Greeks, why not sing about the things the Greeks would have sung about? So this was performed at Corsi's home for the Florentine Camerata, and was apparently well received by the group. Unfortunately, only fragments of this work have survived, but your textbook actually has a brief excerpt. You can see some of the early uses. So today I want to make sure that we have some time to listen to some Peri and some Monteverdi. But go ahead and look at that in your textbook if you haven't already. Okay. So let's talk about one of the first surviving operas, or the first surviving opera, and that is Eurydice. So it is based on Rinuccini's libretto. The text, and this was his famous libretto, which was then later sold and that sort of thing, was set by two composers, Jacopo Peri, who we just mentioned, the setting of Daphne, and then Caccini, who we listened to last time and talked about. So these operas were performed for the first time at the same celebration. at the wedding of Maria de Medici and Henry IV of France. So the two operas were performed at the same time, and then the two raced to be the first to publish an opera for people to purchase. Caccini won that race slightly, and actually Caccini, through some slightly underhanded practices, made Pari's performance slightly less desirable. Many of the musicians worked for Caccini, and he prohibited them from performing for Pari in his early opera. So there's a bit of a rivalry there, but that might also be an interesting paper topic, honestly. Now, does anybody know the story of Orpheus? Yeah, would somebody please enlighten us? Story of Orpheus. Yeah, okay.
Basically, Orpheus was in love with Eurydice. I don't remember like exactly what happened, but basically she was taken to the underworld.
Okay.
And he went down to go get her, but wasn't allowed in. And then they gave him a chance. I'm kind of iffy on some of it.
Okay, you're doing fine. Most of this is accurate.
Yeah, but
you're doing
basically he was given a chance that if he didn't look back at her, then he could have her.
Mm-hmm.
But he couldn't do it, and eventually looked back at her, and then she was taken, or he was. She was taken. He was taken, one of the two.
Okay.
And
Somebody died.
somebody died.
Okay. All right. Who wants to jump in and fill this out? That's all correct. There's more details. We can round this out. Yeah. Go ahead. Zach.
Orpheus, I don't do sing, or he did a competition of singing, but
He was kind of a combination human-god musician.
and he won her in a, via his art forms and all that.
Yeah.
And they're all happy and everything, and then Eurydice is off somewhere. She is bitten by a snake.
Good. Yeah.
She dies, and Orpheus finds out, and is all lamentful, and oh no, and then he goes to the underworld to try to flee with Hades, or depending on which mythology you're going with, and Persephone, Hades' wife, saying, give him a chance, and so Orpheus sings for Hades, and he says, okay, well, if you walk up to the world above, Eurydice will follow you, and you just can't look back at her until you're both out of the door. And right when he's at the threshold, he looks back, and she's sucked back, and
Good.
everything is terrible.
Everything. Good. That's very good. Yeah. So thank you. So in this particular libretto, because this is at a wedding, you don't necessarily want a story where it ends up that someone goes back down to the underworld. So it's a happy ending, and they make it out successfully, and I don't know, go on and have children and have like independent friends or something. But in this setting, it avoids the tragic ending. But there are still tragic elements in the story. There is still, so the two are in love, and then Eurydice, or Eurydice, I don't pronounce it, is bitten by a snake and killed. And so you still have these moments. And we'll listen to an example of that in just a moment. So Caccini's style is the more lyrical, more closely mirrors musical practice at the time, especially in the madrigal. While Pari, Jacopo Pari, better matches the text with the use of a new style, recitative. And we'll talk about just a bit about recitative, and then we will look at some examples of it. So recitative is a style of singing halfway between speech and song. And the idea is that it communicates the emotions of the audience as well as their intellect. So it is able to express what is going on in the story. It is when they are talking to each other or describing actions that are happening, so people can follow what is going on. But it also, because of its musical and especially its harmonic and dissonant effects, it can further express the emotion, or sometimes superconsonant effects, as a way to express joy. Excuse me. So this is modeled after, again, what was believed by Florentine Camerata to have been the style in ancient Greek drama. And we'll look at an example here in just a moment. We'll notice that important syllables are supported by consonant harmonies in the bass, in the basso continuo. Dissonance is then explored between those benchmarks, if you will, between the two different chords. And this is contrasted with the song-like aria. And we're not going to talk about arias today. We'll save that for later. But an aria is usually when a character or characters reflect on something that has happened, and is the more song-like, sometimes even strophic element of an opera. Most of the famous opera excerpts are actually from arias, not the recitative. But we'll talk more about aria when we get to it later. So let's go ahead and look at an example. So we're going to look at, from Jacopo Peri's Eurydice, number 68. So please get to where you can see a score, yourself or your neighbors. It starts on page, we're actually going to start with 68B, so page 401. Well, first, actually, we'll go to the text here. So page 401, does everybody... Now, we're actually going to start with the text. So if you want to hold your finger on page 401 and flip over to 406. Who would like... So what is happening here is Daphne is the messenger who has come to tell Orpheus that Eurydice has been bitten by the snake and has died. So who wants to be the bearer of bad news? Who will be our Daphne? You'll be Daphne. Thank you very much.
Take one for the team.
I appreciate it. I'm very grateful. Please.
Okay. In the beautiful thicket where watering the flowers slowly courses the spring.
Somebody give me an example of where the recitative is used to express the text. Harmonically or vocally, melodically. Measure 22, okay. How so?
The rhythm is faster there,
Mhm.
and then it's like dissonant with the so it expresses pain.
Okay, what is happening there? Measure 22.
Is that O Better Angry Fate? Is that
Good, yeah. Good. Yeah.
Just a general observation. Every time there's a repeated note, it's a good example of recitative because it's like you're speaking, and the intonation of your speech. So it can change, obviously, as you continue on a sentence. But a lot of the times you see there's a lot of repeated notes after each other, and then we'll move to different pitch. So that's just the...
Yeah, no, that's actually very good. And it's one of the quickest ways to identify if you're listening to recitative or not is the repeated pitch over and over and over to mimic the human voice. Very good. Yeah.
Just another general comment. The accompaniment is basically just chordal, so like play a chord and then there will be a line of speech and then another chord, which is also typical of recit.
Good. Did anybody see anything with content? Oh, go ahead. No,
Yeah, I was actually just about to say that.
Okay.
Once you start talking about angry fate, there's a mode change there. We're no longer in Campus Molus, we're in Campus Durus. And as per a comment said earlier, the rhythm also changes and intensity kind of builds with all these, and there are sharp accidentals there too. That's measure 23 and on. That we see a few more.
Good. So that's the moment the snake part. Very good. Good. Is everybody's able to see that transition and you can hear that transition? Good. I'm sorry?
Like on the word evil and bang.
Which measure is that? Sorry.
27. Like the dissonance is right there.
Yeah. And then in the next line is the line is like a ray of sunshine that a cloud darkens is measure 28. Kind of moves from a consonant to then that dissonance in 30 where it darkens, the cloud darkens. Very good. Okay, so I want to go ahead and I think this is a good foundation. Look at this more on your own. I want us to go ahead and get to another early opera so we can contrast them a little bit. So I have a publication of Eurydice operas, the Peri and the Caccini. The style begins to spread and other composers begin to work with opera. Most importantly, the composer we've talked about a few times already, Claudio Monteverdi, who wrote his first opera in 1607, also on the story of Orpheus. Orfeo is the name of this. And in this version, it ends the way that the story really ends, and Eurydice dies. is dragged back down. Orpheus looks back when he shouldn't. But so musically, it combines Monteverdi's skill. He is one of the most important composers of this era. Combines his skill with the emotional writing of Perry's Recitative. And we can remember Monteverdi, we listened to him last time, one of his madrigals in relationship with this debate that he was in with Artusi. So the example we're going to look at is from Orfeo. It's the next one in the book. And again, I want us to pay attention to the enhanced recitative. How is it used to express the emotion of this story? How is joy and pain contrasted modally, harmonically, melodically? So let's go ahead and finish writing that down, and then I'm just going to turn to the next one. But I want us to start with a nice reading of the text. We need a few volunteers. The text, page 427. Who would like to be our Orpheus? Who would like to be a legendary musician? Thank you very much. Would you like to be our shepherd? I saw your hands going up. Great. And then we need a messenger. Who's going to be the bearer of bad news? Well, she had her hand up. Yeah. She hasn't read yet today, so we'll go with her. And I believe, we need a chorus. We'll just have one person read the chorus for today. Who'd like to be our chorus? Evan, thank you. Okay, so let's go ahead with our Orpheus. We're on 427.
Do you remember, O shady woods, my long bitter torments, when the stones to my laments replied, being moved to pity?
What are some examples? You see the harmony of the recitative. Yeah, sorry.
I just thought it was interesting that when he says like things about her dying, then he always like goes really low in his range, and then when he kind of talks about her like ascending, then he gets higher.
Is there where are you looking at?
In 102, he mentions, I think, is that her going to the abyss or something?
Yeah, the abyss is that lowest. Yeah.
And then in measure 106, where he gets really high, I think that's like the highest note in the but he's talking about her saying goodbye.
And that word, Stella, is stars.
Okay.
Yeah. Good. Good. Yeah.
I thought in the very beginning with the messenger,
Okay.
or I mean, anytime she was like saying like oh, like it was like it was literally like E is really high, and like when she was, it was almost like she was like pleading with the shepherd, like I don't know what to do, and the shepherd kept going like, no, what was wrong? He was very, his was very like more a linear fashion of notes.
Yeah.
And then when she was talking to Orpheus, she immediately drops down to low register. And,
Yeah.
you know, 'cause I mean that's how you would give bad news. You wouldn't be like all
Yeah.
shrieking about it.
Yeah. Very good. Yeah.
I thought that in a couple places, like measure 20 in like the first example, and then over about 34, where Orpheus and the shepherd are either trying to figure out what's going on. Their notes are more jumpy, and whereas the messenger sings very lamentingly, theirs are kind of faster, like they're anxious, they want to know what happened.
Yeah, more rhythmically active and melodic leaps to express anxiousness, perhaps. Good. Yeah, Jimmy.
Just kind of the general, like the repetition of the same note, same pitch. In 108, the last four notes, I just heard it there.
108.
Yeah. Just kind of.
Yeah. Good. False notice. Oh, no. Gone yet. I see your hand. I'm gonna get a chance. Yeah, go ahead.
In measures, like it starts at 42 to the top of page 420, and she's saying an unhappy messenger, and telling him that Eurydice is dead. It's very dissonant.
Good.
Spot specifically recorded, kind of like gone back and forth between like sort of dissonant and not really, and at this specific moment, it's like the most dissonant part.
Good. Good. Yeah. Yeah.
In measure 48, I think, is that the first time she said first when she says she's dead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It gets really low,
Mhm.
and it changes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting to note the dynamics that obviously we don't see them on the page, but we heard them in the recording. And the one really good example of, building of intensity and then coming back, in measure 48, when the messenger says morta, all of a sudden we have the instrument, the dynamic is slowly rising and it's becoming a little more intense until Orfeo says oimen, and then once the messenger begins her huge thing in a flowered meadow with her companions, 2 measures after that, all of a sudden it's really soft and very plaintive almost.
Yeah.
So I was intrigued.
Yeah, and we didn't listen to that, but you listened to that before class, and then the chords in the bossa continua just hold out throughout that part. It's much less active as she's recounting the story. Did anybody notice anything with the cantus durus and molus? Yeah.
I don't have like a specific spot,
Mhm.
but I just noticed that the messenger and then Orpheus would like switch off between the two different modes.
Good. Yes, exactly.
Hold on.
Who can find that? So you're saying there's a switch between the two modes, between the messenger and Orpheus and the shepherd.
45, 46.
45. Good. Yeah. The messenger is in the hard to represent the sharps represent the harsh pain, and so but the before they know what's going on, the shepherd and Orpheus are still the more subdued plaintive flats. You can also see it. Look on measure 20. This is where the messenger comes in for the first time. Oh no, wait, the measure comes in. Sorry, in 13, and even there it's in molus, and then there's that switch back and forth between the two. Good. That's almost foreshadowing when the messenger first comes in. If somebody comes in singing sharps, somebody's about to die. Just know that. And that's just opera 101. So. All right. Any other? Yeah.
I was just, at the very last note for we said Adagio, like,
Mhm.
I don't know, I've had listened to too many examples of Orfeo, but, like, what's that person did, like, it's almost like the big crying, like, do people do that a lot, or is that just...
That's a very good question about the performance style and the trilling. Yes, that is fairly common, and there's a fair amount of debate in performance style of what is the proper way to perform that sort of. But performers were often expected to add their own vocal embellishments, and so that expressing that pain, but then also like anxiousness to go on this journey into the underworld. That's what that's supposed to kind of represent. And so performers. What we do know is the performers had a fair amount of liberty to decorate vocally. What we don't know exactly is how they did it. We know that often that's what trilling was done. But yeah.
I mean, I know, like, Caccini, like, didn't want him to, he wrote the embellishment.
Yeah.
Monteverdi was not,
He did. There was more freedom given to the performers.
I was curious, between the first excerpt that we listened to earlier in the class, is there a reason why one is in first person and one is kind of like relating a story? It's like, it almost seems like a narrative, and then this one is more like active.
Yeah. It mostly has to do with the setting of the libretto. The librettist wrote it that way.
Okay.
And the composer is saying that. Now, I believe in
It's
the
not like an
Peri,
era thing?
that in the Peri, we just didn't get to it. You do get to Orpheus saying I. But there is more of Daphne the messenger kind of catching the audience up to speed.
Yeah.
And so there will be more first-person action later in that. But that is still left up to the librettist, not the composer. Yeah. Okay, well I think that we did 11:50. So have a good weekend, and next week we'll see where Monteverdi takes opera a little farther.